Good afternoon, dear distinguished speaker. Good afternoon to all of you joining us online. On behalf of Executive President of Trends Research and Advisory, Dr. Muhammad Al-Ali, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you this virtual meeting under the title Sport Diplomacy as a Pillar of a National Strategy. And thank you very much for accepting the CEO invitation to participate in the symposium, in spite of the short notice. Sport is widely perceived as an element of sport power, allowing states to increase their international profile and showcase their merits to the international public. The use of the concept of sport diplomacy has increased over the past 2 decades. It laid the foundation for long-term relationship between peoples. Sport diplomacy is now an integral part of the wider international soft power model, used by countries to enhance their appeal and means of achieving foreign policy objectives and shaping their mental image and putting political issues in the international agenda. At the Gulf level, sport is important tool through which Gulf state can build new relationship, strength, their shared Gulf identity. It could also be used internationally to improve the Gulf state external relation and image in the world. As a sport has become a popular tool of soft power used as a means by which state can improve their international reputation while building a new political culture and economic bridge between countries. Strategies have been built around the concept of sport diplomacy. In this symposium, designated guests will present many facts and showcase of sport diplomacy. Sport diplomacy as a tool for promoting states' international image. Sport is widely perceived as an element of soft power, allowing states to increase their international profile and showcase their merits in the international public. Sport diplomacy as a geopolitical economy. The example of Qatar hosting of the 2022 FIFA World Cup is a clear example of a state-led geopolitical economy. Sport diplomacy in the GCC. Football has always been more than just a sport in the GCC. In fact, it has been one of the most significant contributors that shape national identity. I wish you a very productive symposium with exciting, encouraging decisions. And now I give the floor to Mr. Farid Razi, moderate this session. Thank you.
Yeah, that is me. I am Muhammad Farid. I am a senior researcher here at Trends, and I'll be moderating this session. So I think it couldn't be more timely, really, to organize this symposium on sport diplomacy. As in the moment we speak, and not far from home, not from the UAE, a big international of the most popular event is taking place. That is the 32nd, I think, World Cup in Qatar. For 2 decades, the Arab Gulf countries have been hosting high-profile sporting events and try to factor really sport into the statecraft equation. From the construction of mega arena capable of welcoming thousands of fans and generous sponsorship deals offered to prestigious football clubs. The dialogue between the Arab Gulf state and sport has given birth to a multi-phased process whereby nation-building endeavors, multi-million businesses ventures, and initiative promoting healthy sport lifestyle merged together in a completely new experience. This E-Symposium seeks to highlight the significance of sports within the context of international relations, especially in promoting peace and contributing to human development and breaking down cultural barriers. So let me then welcome our first speaker, Mr. Yaqub Al-Saadi. He's our keynote speaker. Mr. Yaqub is the head of Abu Dhabi Sports TV channels. He has a long experience in covering sport events at home and abroad. He covered the Olympic Games, football World Cups, Asian World Cups. He leads and supervises all the contents and design of the Abu Dhabi sport channels. He is also a sport writer in different UAE newspapers. In this quality, he has interviewed many world sports personalities, and he obtained many local and regional rewards. Best Arab journalist in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia. So Mr. Yaqub Saadi would speak about the UAE effort in promoting sport and organizing international event. تفضل أستاذ يعقوب. أستاذ. افتح. أيوة.
السلام عليكم. سامحوني راح أتكلم باللغة العربية ورحب بالجميع. في البداية أنا ما أريد أن أبدأ مداخلتي بشكل متشائم وبأخبار غير سارة، لكن إذا حدث أعدكم أن النهاية راح تكون نهاية سعيدة محملة بأخبار سارة. في البداية كان لابد أن نتحدث بشكل سريع عن متغيرات حدثت في كوكبنا وكان لها أبعاد مؤثرة على الكثير من الجوانب، وأستطيع أن أقول بمراجعة التاريخ الإنساني أننا نعيش في عصر غير مسبوق. في العقد الأول من القرن 21 بشرنا على المستوى العالمي بأننا سندخل العصر الذهبي للتقدم والرخاء والسلام، عصر معزز بالابتكار والتطور والتعليم العالي وسوق العقارات الفعال والسياحة وقبول الآخر. وبالفعل بدأ القرن هذه البداية حتى 2008، ومعها بدأ تعثر اقتصادي هائل في العالم كله، وصل إلى أن بعض الغربيين لم يكن لديه القدرة على شراء هاتف محمول. بدأت الكثير من المصانع، مراكز التصنيع والتجميع العابرة للقوميات في فيتنام وفي الصين وفي عدد من الدول تغلق أبوابها، وبالتالي تقلص الطلب على المواد الخام وبدأ تدهور اقتصادي كبير، وانخفضت معدلات التنمية من 7 إلى 4.5% وأقل في أكثر من دولة كبرى ومنها أمريكا نفسها. دخلنا 2011 وبدأ ما يسمى يومها بالربيع العربي، وما حمله من فوضى أدت إلى ضياع دول كاملة سقطت وغير قادرة على العودة. عام 2014 وقعت أحداث الصين وعلاقاتها ببحر الصين الجنوبي والشرقي، ثم ظهرت داعش بكل توابعها وتداعياتها، ثم أحداث كورونا وما حملته من توقف لكل أشكال الحياة، فاختفت السياحة، توقف السفر، وبدأنا عصر من الانعزال التام. ثم دخلنا في مشاكل الهجرة غير شرعية، والآن حرب روسيا وأوكرانيا بكل تأثيراتها الاقتصادية والغذائية، وبدأ كأن الكوكب يخرج من أزمة ليدخل أزمة أخرى. هكذا بدأ الحال في العالم كله. هذا هو السيء في الموضوع. السار أن وسط هذا التعثر، وسط هذا الضباب العالمي الكثيف اللي وصل إلى حد الجنون، كان هناك من يحافظ على الاستقرار، يحافظ على معدلات التنمية والسير بالأمان والعبور بالسفينة وسط هذه الأمواج الصاخبة العاتية إلى شواطئ متقدمة، إلى مواصلة العمل والبناء، بل وإلى مزيد من التطور. كان هناك من يفكر خارج الصندوق بشكل إيجابي، يعمل من أجل الناس وسعادتهم وإبعاد الخوف عنهم وعن مستقبلهم. ونحن من هذه الأمم الحمد لله على نعمة الإمارات ونعمة قيادتها الحكيمة. أنا أردت أن أبدأ بهذه المقدمة لأنها من وجهة نظري هامة وأساسية للغاية، لكي نستطيع أن ننظر للجانب الآخر من القمر، الجانب المضيء، أو حين أتحدث عن الرياضة والعمل من أجل الرياضة وتأكيد وجودها، سنعرف أن معظم الأخبار السيئة اللي بدأت فيها المداخلة تمثل جزء من الأمر، تمثل جانب مما يحدث على الكوكب، ويمكن حل الكثير من هذه الجوانب عبر الرياضة وما تمثله من أهمية إنسانية وصحية واجتماعية وسياسية واقتصادية. الرياضة وهي بالتأكيد جزء من الواقع الاجتماعي كانت ولا تزال تحتفظ بنفس الرونق، نفس الصفاء، نفس المتعة والروح اللي انطلقت منها. على كل حال واقعيا تظل ممارسة الرياضة بين مواطني الوطن العربي ضعيفة مقارنة بكثير من الدول وخاصة الغربية، ونفس الأمر ينطبق على حضور الأحداث والفعاليات الرياضية في الملاعب. ويمكن مقارنة مباراة في أي دوري محلي في أي بلد في الوطن العربي ومقارنته بأحد مباريات الدوري الإنجليزي مثلا، هنا سنعرف فارق المعادلة بالحضور والمتابعة بوضوح. أنا هني ما ناقش ظاهرة الحضور الجماهيري للملاعب اللي تحتاج إلى دراسات اجتماعية ورياضية أشمل وأوسع، لكن أضع أمامكم ظواهر أولية. والمثير في هذا الأمر أنه لدينا في العالم العربي أغلبية كاسحة من حيث متابعة الأحداث الرياضية عبر وسائل الإعلام المختلفة، تلفزيون، وسائل تواصل اجتماعي وغيرها، وتحظى مباريات كرة القدم بشكل خاص بإجماع هائل من حيث المتابعة في العالم العربي. ومعظم أبناء الجيل الجديد يحفظون أسماء لاعبي الفرق الأوروبية وتفاصيلهم الكروية بل والاجتماعية والشخصية، ويشجعون أنديتهم بانتماء يصل إلى حد التعصب أحيانا. وهي ظاهرة أخرى يجب أن تدرس وتناقش لمعرفة الأسباب والدوافع، في مقابل تراجع الانتماء للفرق المحلية بشكل يمكن ملاحظته بقياس أعداد المتابعين للمباريات وأعمارهم والفرق اللي يشجعونها وأي مباراة يقبلون عليها. بعيد عن كل هذه الأبعاد اللي تمثل إطار عام لما نناقشه، بالتأكيد هناك جهود عظيمة في دولة الإمارات وبشكل مكثف وفي كثير من الدول فيما يتعلق بتطوير الرياضة، تطوير المنشآت، دعم المتميزين رياضيا واستضافة الأحداث الرياضية الكبرى وتنظيمها، وعبر توفير البنى التحتية الكاملة والذكية من ملاعب ومرافق ومنشآت. وهذا يمثل استثمار طويل الأجل عوائده مضمونة مع الوقت. وبشكل أساسي فإن الرياضة بشكل عام وتنظيم البطولات بشكل خاص واستضافة الأحداث الرياضية الكبيرة يمثل فرصة لكي يعرف العالم دولنا ويعرف ما لدينا من إمكانات وما لدينا من حضارة وثقافة وتقاليد، يعرف ما لدينا من تقدم وتطور. هذه البطولات من شأنها أن تصحح الكثير من الصور الذهنية والصور الإعلامية الزائفة والمضللة التي يأخذها البعض على دولنا أو دست إليه كذبا. لذا فتنظيم البطولات من البعد السياسي أمر حيوي ومهم للغاية، ويمثل قوة ناعمة مؤثرة تماما. دعوني أضرب لكم 5 أمثلة تعكس لكم الأثر والتأثير. الأول، تنظيم أبو ظبي لسباق الفورمولا 1 في مرسى ياس، على مرسى حلبة ياس، هذه الحلبة العملاقة والعظيمة بكل ما يمثله هذا الحدث من أهمية عالمية وما يمثله من متابعة كثيفة، ثم ما تمثله الحلبة والمكان من روعة وجمال. وكجملة اعتراضية سباقات الفورمولا هي الأكثر متابعة جماهيريا على مستوى العالم بين كل الرياضات في العالم، حتى أكثر من كرة القدم نفسها. هذا الحدث يقدم أبو ظبي كمدينة رياضية لا مثيل لها، تمثل لعشاق هذه الرياضة واحة للحب والمحبة. المثال الثاني، ولا زلت أتحدث عن الإمارات، كأس دبي العالمي للخيول اللي ينظم في ميدان بدبي. كل ما يمثله هذا الحدث الرياضي الراقي من إقبال واهتمام ومتابعة، يحضره في المضمار أكثر من 60,000 متفرج. حدث بكل ما يحتوي من مظاهر حضارية على صعيد المكان والشكل اللي يقام به وقيمة الجوائز الممنوحة للفائزين. حدث عالمي يقام بهذا الشكل والمستوى، يحقق الكثير من المكاسب التي لا تقدر بثمن وتعكس صورة ناصعة أمام الناس لرياضة ملكية. المثال الثالث، شراء الأندية العالمية الكبرى والاستثمار فيها، وهو مسار جديد على المنظومة الرياضية العربية وحقق نتائج عظيمة كما في مانشستر سيتي، باريس سان جيرمان، وأيضا أندية قادمة شاهدنا نيوكاسل أيضا. المثال الرابع، استضافة أبو ظبي لمباراة السوبر المصري. بحكم عملي كإعلامي تغطيتنا للمباراة لمست ورأيت أثر هذه الاستضافة على الشعب المصري تحديدا، ليس في الانبهار والإعجاب بالمرافق والتنظيم، وإنما في الحب اللي بات المواطن المصري البسيط يكن للإمارات ولشعب دولة الإمارات. المثال الخامس وأخرته بسبب أنه لا يزال مستمر، وهو تنظيم واستضافة قطر لأكبر بطولة رياضية في العالم، كأس العالم لكرة القدم. بالتأكيد النتائج التي سيفرزها هذا الحدث، هذا التنظيم، نتائجه لن تظهر الآن، لكن يمكن أن أذكر فقط هنا بالتأثر والأثر التي أحدثته استضافة أمريكا واليابان لكأس العالم لأول مرة على غرار قطر. في 2004 كان لدى الولايات المتحدة 4 ملاعب لكرة القدم، في عام 2010 وصل عدد الملاعب الكبيرة إلى 9 ملاعب، عدد اللاعبين كان في عام 90 مليونين، وصل إلى في 2010 إلى 4 ملايين لاعب في مرحلة الشباب. هذه البطولة وتنظيمها أحدث تأثير عظيم في التنمية والنمو بشكل عام في أمريكا، واستفاد كثير من أعداد الجماهير اللي تدفقت إلى أمريكا. نفس الأمر حدث لليابان عند تنظيم كأس العالم عام 2002 بالمشاركة مع كوريا الجنوبية. البطولة أسهمت في تحسين صورة اليابان وكوريا الجنوبية بشكل كبير، بوصفهم دول متقدمة متحضرة تمثل هذا الوعي الحضاري وهذا التقدم، وبدأ أعداد كبيرة من اللاعبين اليابانيين والكوريين يحترفون في أكبر الأندية سواء في أوروبا وآسيا. في قطر النتائج لا تزال غير مكتملة، لكن كما أعلن قطر أنفقت أكثر من 200 مليار دولار لاستقبال الحدث وتنظيمه، ليست كلها لإنشاء الملاعب أو المرافق الخاصة بإقامة البطولة، وإنما كانت في الإنفاق على البنية التحتية والمرافق والطرق والمواصلات. قبل أكثر من 40 سنة أو أقل كانت معالم قطر قليلة، اليوم لديها ملاعب مكيفة تستقبل الآلاف من الجماهير في قطر. الحدث طفرة هائلة في المنشآت، حدث طفرة هائلة في المنطقة. مع كل هذه المكاسب اللوجستية قدم الحدث قطر للعالم بصورة حضارية لا تقدر بثمن، والعالم رأى بنفس التطور والمنشآت وهذه الروح الحضارية اللي استقبل بها الحدث وهذا التنظيم. واعتقد ان النتائج ستكون هائلة فعلا في المستقبل القريب، سواء على صعيد مزيد من استضافة البطولات او على صعيد التطور الفني والرياضي. انا اعتقد الوقت المحدد لي انتهى، انا اسف اذا تاخرت.
شكرا أستاذ يعقوب على هذه المحاضرة الشيقة، وأنا أعرف أن عندك الكثير ما تقوله في هذا الميدان، فكانت نظرة عامة وقدمت خلالها صورة جميلة لما يحدث في دول الإمارات أو في دول الخليج العربي. شكرا جزيلا لك. I think we will follow our session with our first, after the keynote speaker, Dr. Simon Chadwick. Professor Simon is a researcher, a professor and researcher, writer, an academic, and a consultant, a policy advisor, and speaker, more than 25 years experience in the global sports industry. His work focuses on the geopolitical economy of sport. And Professor Simon is professor of sport and geopolitical economy at Schema Business School in Paris, where he's also a member of its think tank Publica, as well as a program director at Schema's Global Executive MBA Sport. Dr. Simon would focus on the geopolitical economy, on giving us the example of Qatar staging the World Cup. The floor is yours, Professor Simon.
Thank you. I hope I can share my screen just to begin with. I can. That's great.
To recall for a moment, our presentation is for 10 minutes. Okay. And then so it give us a time maybe to some questions.
Okay, I'll try to stick to 10 minutes. Anyway, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for people who are listening to this, and obviously other people who are participating in it as well. I work in a business school, so I tend to see things in terms of business and economics. But I think one of the things that's occurred to me certainly over the last 10 years, but possibly over the last 20 years, is how the nature of business and economics is changing. I'm a particular type of business school academic in that I focus on sport. So I've got a long-term interest in the business of sport. But increasingly during this period that I've talked about, it's very clear that there are some geopolitical influences upon sport and upon business. And so therefore, this is how I arrive at this presentation today, which will look specifically at Qatar, and we'll talk in terms of the geopolitical economy of Qatar. Just to say, there are contact details there if you want to make contact with me. I don't tweet about my lunch. I tweet about the geopolitical economy of sport. So please do feel free to take a look. I'm going to base what I say upon an article I had published earlier this year in the European Sport Management Quarterly about the geopolitical economy of sport, because I think one of the characteristics of this geopolitical economy, as I discuss it in this paper, is that it's no longer a global model of sport that is dominated by Europe. Europe's time really came late 19th, early 20th century, nor is it a model nor do we have a global model of sport that is dominated anymore by the United States. And this is a model of sport that I think characterized the second half of the 20th century. Now, clearly, we now live in an environment where China and India and Russia, some countries in Africa, certainly countries of the Gulf, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, play an increasingly important role in international sport. So by all means, do take a look at this. And just one of the things that I would also recommend is we do have a book coming out during the early part of next year, The Geopolitical Economy of Sport, where we talk about some of the big changes that are taking place in the world, but certainly in the world of sport. And we make repeated reference to sport in the Gulf region. Just to set a little bit of context, my view of sport as a geopolitical economy, I think, is based upon what I call three giga shifts in the world, and certainly from my perspective as a business person, as an economist, I would frame them in those terms. But I guess they're equally as applicable in political terms, in geopolitical terms too. And so the first one is globalization. And if we, for instance, look at the way in which City Football Group, Abu Dhabi owned, state owned, so you begin to get a flavor of where I come at things from. City Football Group is originally Manchester City, East Manchester, England, working class, heavy industry, industrial revolution, late 19th century. And now what you have is an Asian state that owns City Football Group. And the crucial part of City Football Group is they have franchises across the world, in Belgium, in France, in Spain, in Uruguay, in Brazil, in China, in India. And this move towards this kind of franchise model of sport has been underpinned by globalization and free trade, economic liberalism. And taking another example, it's not just about the Gulf or about Asia. We look at, for example, the English Premier League, selling television rights in more than 200 territories across the world, all of which brought about by this economic liberalism that has coincided with and worked alongside globalization. But at the same time, I think what we've also seen is not just globalization, but digitalization. And this has created new opportunities to do business, new opportunities in political terms. But I think if you look at, again, to use an example, Qatar's beIN Sport. For people who are listening, you will know that beIN Sport initially emerged out of Al Jazeera, but is now a separate operating unit, a separate operating business. And essentially what Qatar has been able to do is to build a digital presence in several important broadcasting markets across the world, as a consequence of digital technology. And what we also know in terms of giga changes is in broad terms, what I would call environmentalism. Yes, there is a big concern about degradation of the natural environment. Inevitably, we are beginning to see resistance towards oil and gas consumption. This is a particularly significant challenge for the Gulf region for I hope, obvious reasons. And so what we see is not just Abu Dhabi investing in City Football Group, we see Qatar investing in Paris Saint-Germain, Saudi Arabia, as we've already heard, in Newcastle United. So we also see sport being deployed for policy purposes as a means through which to economically diversify. And so what Gulf nations in particular are doing, but I think others are doing it too, is to try and reduce this dependence upon carbon fuel revenues. And sport and sport tourism, the acquisition of sports rights, the provision of services like beIN, as we've already mentioned, are all part of this. So in the context of these changes, these giga changes, as I see them, and as I describe in the paper that I mentioned to you a little earlier, what I now advocate is we need to see sport not just in social terms, it's community, it's health, its identity, nor should we be seeing sports solely in business terms, and that's a very North American view of sport. What I'm arguing is in the 21st century, yes, we need to acknowledge the sociocultural role of sport. Yes, we need to acknowledge the commercial role of sport, but there is something much broader, which I characterize as the geopolitical economy of sport. And I'll put that definition up there just because I'm an academic and that's what academics do. But what I would like to do is to kind of move swiftly on. Before I do so, can I just say that this notion of a geopolitical economy is equally as applicable to non-Gulf nations, non-Asian nations for that matter. And if you look at, for instance, the way in which the British government deploys sport for policy purposes overseas, especially in the area of soft power, you begin to see that geopolitical economy is not synonymous simply with countries of the Gulf. So, kind of deconstructing the geopolitical economy, thinking first in terms of geography. Again, being very simplistic, I only have 10 minutes. If we're thinking in terms of physical and human geography, the physical geography of Qatar means that it has access to extremely large sources of liquefied natural gas. And I think one of the connections that football fans of the world don't necessarily see is the reason that Paris Saint-Germain has been able to acquire so many high-profile, expensive players is based upon essentially the physical geography of Qatar. But at the same time, we know there are human geographic elements to consider, certainly in relation to Qatar. So, for example, given the disparate nature of the population, 3 million people, 10% Qatari, 25% Indian, and a whole number of others besides. Again, the human geography has essentially shaped Qatar's use of sport as a basis for seeking to promote a kind of coherent national identity. And certainly, this issue of social cohesion is I think is important in Qatar. But at the same time as geography, what we've seen is Qatar engaging on again, in broad terms, a political project. We've had the geography, this is the politics. There's an element of nation building within this. Qatar 12 years ago didn't have a network of 8-lane highways. It didn't have world-class sporting infrastructure. It didn't have a metro network. It now does. And so I think the World Cup has been used for nation building purposes. And I think this nation building purpose, one of the things that I've not talked about is the contribution that I think that that the World Cup makes to Qatari security, because the World Cup has enabled the country to build interdependencies with other nations. So suddenly Qatar is important, and one of the consequences of that or one of the reasons for that is as a consequence of organizing the World Cup to create these interdependencies. But Qatar has also deployed the World Cup for purposes of soft power, also for relationship building and diplomacy. If we look at an initiative like, for instance, Generation Amazing. Generation Amazing is a legacy, a World Cup legacy initiative that is now working, for example, in Palestine, in Rwanda, in Jamaica. So the World Cup has been an instrument of as I say, of diplomacy, of building international relations, and I think accentuating this brand proposition that Qatar is trying to communicate to the world. And of course, you've got the economy, not just the geography, the politics, but also the economy too. And you can see here really the convergence of several elements of geography, politics, and economy. Qatar Airways, Hamad International Airport, becoming a global transit hub, rivaling Dubai, its regional neighbor. What's particularly interesting, I think, is in the 5 years following the end of the World Cup, Qatar is seeking to attract an additional 6 million visitors to the country, tourists. And so in terms of the brand proposition, in terms of its positioning in the market, and I think Qatar is trying to position its tourism offer in a different way to Dubai, how people from across the world logistically get to Qatar. All of this is significant. One thing I would point out as well, Qatar Airways, 6 times in the last decade, Global Airline of the Year. For the last 2 years, Hamad International Airport has been the airport of the year. And so this is a brand, this is a proposition that is imbued with a set of values that, as I say, is essentially preparing Qatar for its post-World Cup future. So at that point, I'll say thank you for listening. And for those of you who've been watching the World Cup in Qatar, enjoy the tournament, but do keep in mind it's not just about kicking a ball.
Thank you very much, Professor Simon. This has been really enlightening, and as you said, there's really giga changes going on, and I liked your way to deconstruct this nexus. So many elements in this under the umbrella of what looks as a benign thing. In fact, there are, as you have mentioned, human element. You have national building, security, economy, tourism. So that was demonstrated, and I think, to that, it has been, as I said, really fruitful to put it in this way. Although in 10 minutes there's much, there's can't say too much, but I think you have given the roadmap to understanding this global phenomena. Thank you very much. And our next speaker, it's Dr. Diana Galeva. Dr. Diana is a visiting fellow at Oxford Center for Islamic Studies and a non-resident fellow in the Gulf International Forum. She previously was an academic visitor to St. Antony's College, University of Oxford. She is also the author of 2 books, and it comes to the point that Qatar, the practice of rented power. And I would love to hear that, because it's quite challenging as a concept. She has also, this book has been published in 2022. And Russia and the GCC, the case of Tatarstan, where you do in your fieldwork, I think. Tatarstan Paradiplomacy. And this one also is published this year. She has also co-authored the collection of Post-Brexit Europe and the UK, policy challenges toward Iran and the GCC state. That was in 2021. She has completed a bachelor in Kazan Federal University, Russia. She holds an MBA from Exeter and a PhD from Durham in the UK. And I would like the concept that you introduced in your book, the concept of rented power. And I think that what your lecture is going to be about. We would love to hear that, to hear more about that, because as quite, for me at least, quite a new concept. We heard about all sorts of power, but rented power, yeah, it looks quite exciting.
Thank you so much.
Yours.
Thank you so much for, first of all, kind invitation and for this quite kind remarks. It's a great honor to be today with you. And I would like to share, yes, this is actually the findings of my PhD thesis that I published as a book. And indeed, the rented power is a kind of alternative type of power, which I would like to introduce today for your attention. So Qatar hosts the 22nd World Cup currently. So it's a novel tournament in many ways. Qatar has never hosted an event of such size and global importance before. And in fact, it's the first country in the Middle East to host the tournament. At the same time, it will be also the first World Cup, which would be which is implemented during the kind of not summertime, but during November and December. So despite all of this novelty, we know that there were a lot of controversies when the Doha actually won this opportunity to host the World Cup. And I've been following, and just recently, for example, Western media has been very active and in a way very negative, showing the coverage about the World Cup. It accused Qatar of bribery, corruption, raised concerns over the human rights of migrant workers, considering the workers' conditions of a modern-day slavery. Previously, there were also other controversies how the Doha will host the place during the summertime. Then that's why it was rescheduled to other the timing. And already there were some even implications for some foreign kind of relations with other countries. For example, with Germany, when Qatar's foreign minister has accused Germany of double standards, so we could see some cooling relations. So basically, what I've tried to do to really understand, can we consider the Qatar's foreign policy since 1995, and within this concept, kind of World Cup and sport diplomacy, which Doha implemented over these years, because there were a lot of attention paid in academia, trying to explain, can we understand that through the concept of soft power, or, for example, there were a lot of analysts who explained Qatar's bid as an example of soft power or national branding strategy. Thomas James of Qatar University. However, there were also others who questioned the impact of over dependence of soft power. And for example, the Paul Brannigan and Richard Giallinotti, they argued that Qatar's effort to understand kind of World Cup should be understood within the concept of soft disempowerment, and they really offered very impressive kind of paper in this regard as well. So, for example, Mohammed Al-Fani, he counters the Qatari labor rights reforms have helped refuse this criticism, restoring soft power capacities in the process. Actually, in my book, I'm trying to offer alternative and a type of power which I call the rented power. And in general, I explained the Qatar's foreign policy since 1995 when Sheikh Hamad came to power. And I argue that Qatar wielded a rented power. And what I mean by that, it's basically why I selected this title, because Qatar is a state with limited capacities. They were only using a credible power source, which is wealth, and they mainly relied on that. And they relied on the engagement with non-state actors. So in other words, they were trying to kind of rent well-established transnational influence already of these non-state actors. And I looked at their relation with political Islam actors, with media entities, with sport entities, among others. Tribes also considered them as a non-state actor. So, and it became quite important to implement their influence. So using the key measurement of rented power, mainly it relies on dull interpretations and other kind of political and social scholarships, but mainly in Dall's measurement of power, social power, he relies on the idea of scope, domain, weight, and cost. So, and the qualities and limitations of these non-state actors can be mainly understood through this understanding. So with main means of what Qatar was using to implement its power was money, wealth. Then state can use this capacity directly or indirectly to sponsor non-state actors. And this could be explained as a scope of or methods or how the country able to implement this engagement with non-state actors. The main basically focuses on the geographical where of a state's influence, while weight examines the kind of influence what country were able to implement, and cost, it's about basically the cost which country or disadvantages what the country pays for these policies. Well, briefly speaking, is the example of Qatar using kind of the main power capacity as a wealth. We know that there were like a lot of attractive, Qatar attracted a lot of prestigious international sports superstars, ambassadors, and even there were like a lot of discussions about the corruption of how the World Cup was won. On the scope or the ways of methods, how Qatar was trying to implement this policy, here we could basically divide them by hosting mega events, such as the World Cup, or buying prominent football clubs, for example, purchase of PCG, or selling the Qatari brand through the shirt sponsorships with famous clubs, for example, with Barcelona, with Bayern Munich, and Roma. Qatar also building on these ideas, what Professor Simon mentioned about the role of football in general, and the globalization, the first what I'm looking also, because of this globalization nature, or how I consider it, because of the transnational nature. So the domain of with this attitude was towards the kind of the global influence there, and because the football can be understood as a global game. So this was quite important to spread its influence globally. By winning the right to host the World Cup, we could see here that Qatar took the event outside of the football traditional powerhouses, representing the weight of Qatar's rented power. However, in terms of the cost, already I mentioned there were a lot of controversies, and perhaps it's quite early to predict whether Qatar will be able to really implement more weight or cost. And because all this it's about measurement and time only, we can see that. But in general, I believe that this idea of the rented power really kind of effectively shows, and in this case of the World Cup as well, how the country can try to build these alliances with non-state actors and further try to use their transnational nature for their power implementation. Thank you so much for your attention.
Much, Dr. Diana. Yeah, I think now I start to understand a little bit the concept uses the rented power. Well, I would look, if I well understood, that it look at it as a power multiplier. I mean, you so some sort of multiplying the power that you already have, a power of money or power of other type, and then you multiplying it through this non-state actors, as you mentioned. Yeah, it's quite exciting ideas, but at the same time,
Sorry, if I
Yeah.
may to continue your idea,
Yeah.
you're absolutely correct. In terms of the, I think I just give a small difference from the soft power, why it's really different. When we speak about soft power, it's about when the state itself, having its own values, try to spread its influence. In Qatari case, we could see that mainly it was the means of power, it was wealth. So because they weren't really relying on their other power capacities, they were trying to use the already established influence of non-state actors. Sorry for interrupting.
And I would just one word about the controversies that you have mentioned. In fact, well, yeah, of course, I think one has to be clear about it. I think this is too much of in Arabic. There's a beautiful proverb said "حق ولد به باطل," which is, yes, I mean, Russia has had the last 2018 World Cup. Russia is not a model of democracy, but there wasn't too much controversies about that. Anyhow, I think one has to be somehow. Yeah, I think we will leave it into the discussion if we have time. Yeah, I follow on the same track to stay in the Gulf with Miss Amna Mosley, if I pronounce your name right. She's a researcher at the Gulf Research Center. She's obtained her master's degree in political science at Columbia University, New York, and bachelor degree in political science at Georgetown University, Washington. Her research interest lies in the U.S. GCC relations, sports, diplomacy, and energy. So I think it's good timing to just to continue on the issues we just discussed with Dr. Liana. And the floor is yours, Dr. Amna.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. I wanted to start off by saying thank you to Trans Research and Advisory for their kind invitation. It is truly my pleasure to represent the Gulf Research Center in today's very important topic. So it's no question that football has always been more than just the sports in the Gulf. In fact, it has been one of the most significant contributors that shape national identities. And like we said before, Qatar is the first to host a FIFA World Cup within the region. So there's no question that the World Cup presents an opportunity for Qatar politically, economically, and socially. But it also presents an opportunity for the entire Middle East. As the Secretary General, His Excellency Hassan al-Thawadi stated at the United Nations in 2016, the 2022 FIFA World Cup will not be Qatar's World Cup, but a World Cup for the entire Middle East. It's therefore important to see that the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, from a holistic perspective, bringing together many elements that can promote development as well as unity in the region and beyond. So on the one hand, the World Cup is expected to increase Qatar's influence regionally and internationally and further enhance its image. Of course, Qatar has effectively been using sports to bring about positive change at different levels, domestically and regionally. Currently, Qatar is ranked among the top 20 countries worldwide in sports market intelligence company SportCal's Global Sports Impact GSI Nations Index. It is, of course, important to highlight the economic benefits for Qatar. So according to the World Bank, the economy is expected to expand by 3% over the medium term. Moreover, IPA Qatar stated that since winning its bid to host the World Cup, the country's GDP has grown with an average growth of 4.5% over 11 years between 2010 and 2020. Qatar itself has estimated that tourism has increased from 1.5 million to 2009 to 2.9 million in 2016. And as mentioned before by Dr. Simon, the number of tourists is projected to reach even more after the World Cup by 7.5 million by 2030. However, hosting the World Cup was never focused on providing economic benefits for Qatar. Instead, the tournament is part of Qatar's national development and modernization plan. It is clear that then sports is seen within the context of Qatar's economic diversification strategy and part of its rapid transformation. Currently, sports is seen as a primary vehicle through which to provide a variety of services to its citizens and to provide avenues for active participation for its wider population. Overall, sports is, of course, a lucrative business worldwide and therefore an essential and valid aspect of any diversification strategy. On the other hand, Qatar 2020 will also bolster unity and strengthen relations between Qatar and the rest of the region. The rest of the GCC, for example, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Oman, are witnessing positive spillover effects from the tournament, like what we mentioned before. These neighboring countries are preparing for fan visits and for more accommodations. For example, there are so many established shuttle service connecting Qatar to regional cities such as Jeddah, Riyadh, Dubai, and Kuwait City. This in turn will of course increase revenue for the GCC in terms of local airlines, hotels, hospitality venues, and travel agencies such as the UAE-based Expat Sports and Saudi-based Travelit. Additionally, Dubai Harbor in the UAE will also be among the 6 locations worldwide to hold FIFA fan festivals during the World Cup. And according to a report by S&P Global, Dubai will be one of the major beneficiaries outside of Qatar given its geographical proximity. It is then, of course, important to see that the Qatar World Cup will benefit not only Qatar, but the entire Middle East. And the effects of the Qatar World Cup will likely be felt for many years to come. Thank you all for listening and thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much, Amna. I think, yeah, I mean, certainly there'll be a repercussion on the entire region, and then I think we'll have to wait and see whether this enthusiasm will continue after the World Cup. And for our last speaker, in fact, I was having you as the main one, but as because your lecture would be as the general frame for our conference, but for time reason, you're going to intervene the last. Mikhail Goberski. I'm sorry if you tell me if I pronounce your name right. He's a PhD with habilitation. He's an associate professor in the Department of Political Theory and Thought, Faculty of International and Political Studies, University of Lodz. His research interests include sport diplomacy, politics and sport, nation branding, and public diplomacy with a specific focus on the use of sport. He's a principal investigator of the research project, Consensual and Branding Role of Sport in Diplomatic Activity of States and Non-State Actors, funded by the National Science Center, Poland. He's also author of numerous books, chapters, and scientific articles. Today, he's going to speak about sports diplomacy as a tool for promoting states at the international image. The floor is yours, Mikhail. Sorry. Can you hear us, Mikhail? Yeah, I think you're the sound. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I'm hearing you.
Yeah, the floor is yours. I think they have a little bit of problem with the sound. Can you hear us, Mikhail? I think we're having a little bit of a problem from connection. Just wait for a few minutes and see. disappear. مفتوح عندي هذا؟
Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Yeah, fine.
I'm sorry, I got disconnected, and now I'm sharing internet on my phone. Hopefully, it's going to be better now. With the name, it's Michał Kobierecki, but don't worry, I'm used to problems with pronouncing my name. I haven't been here from the beginning. Sorry about this, but what I have heard is that the presentations before were basically focusing on the current World Cup in Qatar. My presentation is going to be a bit more general, and it is based on my book on sports diplomacy from 2010, but it's a revisited approach. So a couple of new thoughts which I wanted to share. Not to talk too long, maybe I'll skip the theoretical introduction because some of the things were mentioned already. We've been hearing, about soft power. We've been hearing about soft disempowerment. We've been hearing about sports diplomacy. So to make it a bit quicker, maybe I just move to the main focus of my presentation. I would like to tell you a couple of words about the key methods which are employed, which are used by states in order to improve the way they are perceived by the global public, or in other words, to improve their image. And I'm going to start with something that we've been hearing about already today, hosting sports events, and by this I mean sports mega events in particular. So their usefulness for branding states, for shaping the image of states is kind of obvious. It provides international visibility. It allows reaching wide public because of the enormous interest, enormous popularity of sports events these days. Although this is of course nothing new. Such use of sports actually began already in the interwar period when international sports was gaining the popularity, and at this time non-democratic regimes of Germany and Italy were trying to build on this. But this hasn't changed, and actually more and more sports events are analyzed from this perspective or interpreted from the perspective of shaping of their contribution to shaping image of states. Of course, it's not always that this is the main objective of hosting them, but it's become one of the crucial non-sporting issues relating to hosting sports events, to contribute the image of the state, the image of the host, concerning the fact how costly they are. So obviously there should be some benefit for the image of such countries. Apart from this, we can speak of sports achievement as the potential source of international attraction. And sports performance, actually, I would like to divide into two subcategories. So the first of them would be achievements in international sports, which basically can be observed in many international sports events. We can observe the race to win the Olympic medal table. We can observe a lot of dedication being attached to good performance in most elite sports competitions, such as the current World Cup. Basically, it has been considered as an indicator for the success of the state, for the efficiency of its authorities, obviously for the power of the country. Obviously, not all states are capable of performing well in international sports competitions, simply because it is very difficult. And at the same time, states have limited capability of affecting this particular thing, because there are certain issues which lay beyond the control of states. Factors which are in this sense useful is the big population, because this is the source for the talent selection. It is the wealth of the country, because this allows developing elite sports systems. But not everything is under the control of the government. But just like hosting sports events, this creates publicity. This allows to put states the center of the interest of the media or of the people around the world. And as in the case of hosting sports events, sometimes states have been trying to do something extra, to do something more in order to be able to perform good in international sports competitions, both historically and these days as well. The second subcategory within sports performance that I wanted to talk about is the high level of domestic sports. I mean, those two issues are often interconnected, but some states basically have such assets like sports leagues, which are popular around the world, sports teams, which are becoming the brand with fans around the world, individual sports stars, sports celebrities who have the capability of affecting many people around the world. They are often engaged also in different forms of social campaigns. They are becoming goodwill ambassadors of the UN and so on. So this is something that, again, is not so much subject to intervention by the government, although in the history we also had some examples when more or less directly governments were trying to improve the level of domestic sports, but governments may try to build on what is available. They may try to benefit from this in terms of public diplomacy, in terms of nation branding. They may try to use sports stars as a form of ambassadors of the country, as the people who are to spread the desirable messages, desirable information about this kind of country. So far, I've been talking about issues which are usually used by those countries that are either rich or powerful or with large populations. But sometimes sports may be used for shaping state's image also by the countries with fewer assets, with fewer possibilities, and with greater problems. Here I am referring to participation in sports. Of course, for most of the countries in the world, this is something natural, that they compete in Olympic Games, in World Cup, in qualifiers, basically in international competitions. But for some of them, this is not that natural. And by those countries, I mean particularly those with limited international recognition. Those for whom one of the principal goals is to have as many countries in the world recognize them diplomatically. And for them, just being able to compete in this kind of events, which I've mentioned, is the great possibility of putting themselves in the position similar to other states. And in this sense, participation in sports may sometimes be considered as one of the qualities of statehood. So that this way they are trying to lobby international sports organizations. They are trying to do whatever possible to be able to compete in such events. And of course, the most recent example of this situation is Kosovo, which since its declaration of independence was trying hard to be able to be recognized. I mean, it's for federations to be recognized by the IOC, FIFA, UEFA, and others. Going on to less popular or less popular methods, I have also recognized in my research foreign sports investment. We've been hearing from Diana earlier about Qatari investment in Paris Saint-Germain, sponsorship with Barcelona and other clubs. And basically, this is something what I mean. So citizens from such countries investing in or foundations like in case of Qatar, investing in sports in other countries, which of course to a lesser extent, but still is aimed to increase the international awareness and create potentially positive associations with such countries. I think the first high-profile example of this was Russia's Roman Abramovich and his engagement in Chelsea FC. The next one would be sports development aid. This is something that I believe was more developed during the Cold War times when the two superpowers were trying to attract the non-aligned states. But this is something that still, to some extent, is being used by countries. Basically, it's about activities like financing the development of sports facilities, like donating sports equipment, like providing training. In the past, it's been also about sending sports experts or inviting people from other countries to study at the sports universities in such countries. Development aid basically is the typical public diplomacy method. So in this sense, this is just moving this method into the area of sport. so simply trying to help develop sports in other countries, and at the same time creating interpersonal connections, creating bonds between societies. Another one is sports exchanges. Sports exchanges actually to some extent collide with sports development aid, because in some cases such exchanges were actually connected to providing training, to providing clinics, to providing sports expertise. But it's basically about creating the possibility for people from two different countries to meet, to connect. Again, this was a very typical method of public diplomacy during the Cold War, and it still is being used by some states. However, during the Cold War, it had a more state-led form. However, these days, I believe more often this kind of exchanges are either organized individually by athletes or by non-governmental organizations, or is having a less elite level. In this sense, it's not so much that elite athletes are being sent to provide demonstrations, but more athletes, for example, are getting the possibility to meet with their peers in other countries and practice sports together, compete together, and so on. So these are the key methods which I wanted to tell you about, but I also wanted to refer to some new trends, new approaches, and of course the challenges in this concerning the use of sports for shaping state's international image. Quite recently, there was the World Expo in Dubai, and this was actually part of my research. I was visiting all the state pavilions looking for references to sports. So my observation was that of course not in many of them, and it was rarely an overriding theme, but in many of them there were at least some references to sports. Pavilions were trying to advertise successes in sports, sports infrastructure, sports events being hosted in such countries. They were advertising local sports, local sports festivals. So in this sense, we can see that those key methods, which I mentioned earlier, are also employed in other forms of promotion of states. In this sense, we can further see that the connection between sports and soft power. And another new trend, which is subject to the growing interest by some scholars, is esports. Which is also becoming its popularity is obviously growing very rapidly, and there are also possibilities of using esports for this kind of activities to improve the image of states. Although I honestly would say I'm not an expert of esports yet. And to end, I wanted to refer to the fact that even strong big investments in sports, even a lot of effort being made to use sports to improve the image of countries, does not really guarantee the success. So in this sense, I wanted to refer to the reputational risk, to things Diana mentioned in reference to soft disempowerment. Nothing is easy here. Of course, sport events, sport achievements, and many other of the methods allow to become in the center of development, to become in the spotlight, but at the same time it allows whistleblowers, it allows activists to raise attention to those undesirable issues relating to the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mikhail. It's a very interesting speech where you have exposed the different methods and forms that sport as a tool of promoting the image of the country. And I think with that we come to the end of our symposium. But before that, although as I said, it is a recorded event, if you allow me to ask a few questions, and we can have later a discussion, because I know that you haven't said it all. You may have more to say about that. So, and I think we can take the advantage of these questions and answer the session. My first question is, sometimes it is said that sports sport diplomacy is double-edged sword, as it contributes to promoting and enabling, empowering countries. It can also be, as it was mentioned, I think, with Dr. Diana, it can also be a tool to disempowerment for, as opposed to the commonly assumed soft power. I mean, what is this paradox here? I don't know if you can say something about it. You know, sport diplomacy is used to enhance and to promote countries, but at the same time, it might also be, it can fire back. And I don't know if you can, if any of you can say something about it. Dr. Diana, because you mentioned that before.
Yes, I think this is very interesting and very important question also to consider, and whether we can call it soft power or soft disempowerment, whatever. So what I wanted to say firstly, I just made the homework, just Russian press coverage on the World Cup in Qatar. And I found that there is a lot of like huge difference how the Western press were presenting that, the World Cup, a lot of controversies, like a lot of criticism. But at the same time, also in Russia, for example, there is like Ruskaya Gazeta, the quite famous official newspaper, and they only contained around like 19 published pieces on the World Cup, and most of them really took like neutral coverage. And but there is only one about the scandalous interviews and fakes in social networks. Why won't Europe and USA calm down that the World Cup will be held in Qatar? And how they explain the why critique started, because actually Qatar weren't able to offer the kind of to be as an alternative to offer a gas to Europe. So I'm just trying to bring here that there are a lot of like the political issues here as happening, but at the same time, despite that, we also could see that because of there are not a lot of coverage. So this soft power, or in my context, like domain of rented power, is not so huge or big in comparison to West. Despite of all of this critique, it seems like World Cup were quite expected event, first of all. Then there were also coverage that everyone knows Qatar, because in Russia, for example, they would explain only where Qatar is located, where part of the Middle East, whatever. So they were assuming that people are not very much familiar with the country. But in case of the Western coverage, you could feel that everyone knows that the World Cup will be held in Qatar. So I think that this is very important as well. Despite of this critique, a lot of discussions, we could see that some negative, perhaps branding, it also makes sense, and also perhaps does this kind of soft power in a way effect, if we see that. And I think just last point about the measurement about soft power and hard power. And you mentioned about Russian case in 2018, and we could see here that there were some critiques about corruption as well. But I think with the current developments, what's happening now, we could see how hard power and Russian intervention to Ukraine completely diminished all effect of soft power, which was built after the World Cup 2018. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any colleague can give it a go? Simon?
Yeah, Diana, thanks for providing me with a lead into my comments, because I think one of the things that we should talk about is Russia and Russia's relationship with Qatar. It's interesting that 2 or 3 weeks ago, the Emir of Qatar actually met Vladimir Putin in Kazakhstan. And there was a big press opportunity, which the Western countries interpreted as Qatar is a bad country because the emir is talking to Vladimir Putin, and Putin is a bad person. So in terms of media framing, I think there was something really interesting. For me, the meeting was significant because during 2020, there were reports that Russia was planning a major cyber attack of the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games. And my reading of the emir's meeting with Putin was essentially, please just leave us alone. One of the things that the Qataris have been really concerned about in their preparations for the tournament over the last year is a major cyber attack, not necessarily from Russia, perhaps from Israel, maybe even from the likes of Anonymous for various reasons. So I think there was something really interesting there about that meeting and this, what it symbolized, and also how it was interpreted and framed around the world. But otherwise, yeah, I really like Diana's point about essentially Russia now has used up its soft power armory. There's nothing left in the cupboard because all of the goodwill, and it really wasn't about the 2018 World Cup. It was also about the 2014 Olympic Games in Sochi. It was also about Gazprom sponsorship. So this is something that I've written about extensively, about Gazprom sponsorships. This dates back to the Bundesliga club Schalke in 2006, agreeing a deal with Gazprom, then UEFA and the Champions League. We could spend probably 2 or 3 days talking about this, but essentially in tandem with this gas dependence, and we use this word dependence again, which I think is very closely related to power and control. But as Gazprom and Russia were building this gas dependence, this was ably enabled, or kind of willingly enabled, by Gazprom, which was a major sponsor, which few people questioned, even though Champions League fans, they didn't know this company, they didn't know this brand, they didn't know what it provided, they didn't know what the intentions were. But nevertheless, Gazprom had legitimacy in the eyes of football fans. And as I say, at the same time, it was enabling the creation of this gas dependence, which we now understand the outcome, one of the outcomes of from what's happened this year.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, I have a second question. I mean, Mikal, you wanted to say something, yeah?
Short theoretical comment, because I really liked I think you mentioned about the double sword, about sports diplomacy. And it also to some extent corresponds with what Simon just said. So let's remember that sports diplomacy, it's not only about creating the image of countries. It's also about the use of sports for shaping relations with different countries, like the bilateral relations. And in this sense, we have sports diplomacy, which basically is about using sports to bring states closer together. But we also have this dark side, something what Stuart Murray calls sports anti-diplomacy, which is the use of sports to try to hit the political opponents in international relations. So also in this sense, we have this double-edged sword of sports diplomacy.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I have a second question, which really to do, because when you talk about sport diplomacy and the effort to different countries into putting itself on the world stage, we really look at that as necessitates a lot of investments and a lot of financial investment in order to be visible on the world stage. The two things have been related. The soft power enhancement really necessitates a lot of economic investment, as we have given the example of Qatar. The first speaker was talking about 200 billion or something like that. Does it always work like this? Is there another way, more modest and less costly, to put oneself or one country into the world stage, or without that? You have mentioned, Mikal, I think one of the forms that some poor countries may brand themselves by having, for example, a good player or as an ambassador, or talk about some, African countries like Cameroon or Cote d'Ivoire or something like that. But do these two things go together? In order to enhance your soft power in sports, you have to be able to buy clubs and invest hugely in infrastructure, or there's another way to do it?
Sorry, Michal, if you want to go first. If I could illustrate two examples, two non-Gulf examples for you. The first one is of Britain. So the British government has a project called Premier Skills, and Premier Skills, which is delivered in conjunction with the Premier League, essentially involves teaching people around the world to speak English using football. It's relatively low cost, but of course, if everybody speaks English, everybody loves English football. Everybody speaks English ultimately. It makes transacting, it makes building relationships, it makes diplomacy much more straightforward. And so I think, as I said in my presentation, we shouldn't see this use of sport for soft power purposes or for diplomatic purposes as being synonymous with, for example, the Gulf region. So that's the British example. The other example that I would highlight is China's policy of stadium diplomacy in Africa, which is relatively inexpensive. So essentially what has been happening for the last 2 decades is China will approach a prospective African Cup of Nations host. It will say, hey, let us help you with your stadium building program. And typically stadiums are built by China for these African nations on one of 2 bases. The first one is they build it free. There's a free stadium, we've built it for you. The second way to do it is through a series of soft loans, which is lending money with conditions at significantly reduced rates of interest. In return, what China gets, and I'm thinking particularly, for example, of Angola in 2011, one of the world's biggest oil suppliers, but obviously you've got the likes of Gabon as well, where the same thing happened. Cameroon, last year, 2021, it also happened, is these countries have significant deposits of oil, gas, but other minerals, rare earths, and so forth that are significant in terms of China sustaining its economic performance. And so I think that's a particularly good example too. It's not just about language, certainly in the case of, which is Britain, but certainly in the case of China, it's about that economic and political influence that the country has on the region, enabled by building football stadiums.
Michael, you wanted to say something about that?
I think Diana was first, so I'll just wait.
You're too much of a gent, Michal. You're too much of a gent.
Yeah. Diana, you wanted to add something? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, please, Michal. Yes, you were first and second, please.
Sorry, I didn't hear you. No, just about this question of in order to make to brand oneself through sport, does that always? Simon has given 2 examples whereby you have less costly investments, and then you can brand yourself, of course, can use soft power. You give the Chinese example, but I think I just have a little comment about that on your answer, which is the Africans or the Africans countries, when they have to compare let's bring us to international relations straightforward. When they have to compare, they know, of course, that Chinese are benefiting. Surely, they would invest, go to countries where they have a lot of potentials, minerals or oils. But they would say, all right, then, other countries have been doing this for the last century, and we didn't get any gifts. It was straightforward way. It's not. So if the Chinese we know this is not a charitable association. They have, been, of course, interest in Africa. But if we must interact with all of them, we would prefer the ones that came with bonus. Yeah, that the state of mind. China was building mosques as well. I mean, you can imagine sometimes they from my own country, they would do a lot of voluntary work, like they're doing the roads for nothing or building things like that. Symbolic, of course. They have a lot of big contracts in North Africa. But I said the normal citizens there, how does it work? It works okay. The Europeans, when they come, also the Americans, they also interested into what you have as but it comes for nothing. There's no technology transfer. There is just one way, and that's how I think. And it is non-ideological at all. Now the things are how much you get, and yeah, I think that's
if I could just say, ideologically, private equity investors from the United States or major corporations from the United States, ideologically, this does stand for something. It's not ideologically nothing, and obviously what they offer tends to be very liberal and free market as opposed to centrally planned in some way. But nevertheless, I think if we see now in European football significant investments from US private equity investors, and it's almost as though they are white knights. So after the years of Abramovich and those nasty people from Saudi Arabia and those nasty people from Abu Dhabi, the white knights of US private equity investment have arrived to save us. But the reality is ideologically they still stand for a particular set of principles, and they're also seeking something in return. So this is not a unilateral relationship where they give and we receive. It is definitely a bilateral relationship.
Yeah. No, I mean, what I meant by ideological, I mean, the people, the African people, when they have their preferences, now they don't follow the old ideological separation during the Cold War. I mean, either we are dealing with the USSR and for sometimes the position were more ideologically marked. But I think for the moment, the attitude of the Africans are more, would I say, pragmatic, more than we don't care really whether it comes from one side or another, as long as how much we benefit I think that's what I meant. I didn't mean the promoters. Diana?
Yes, just because we misunderstood each other. Just if I may, answering to the second question, I think that this is the important differences between what I was explaining about rented power and soft power. So in terms of what you are saying about the investment, how much we invest, that's about the renting. It's about the kind of build all this influence based on the means or wealth, and then trying to use others' values or ideological issues, what you mentioned now. But if the country basically based on its soft power values, and what Professor Simon mentioned about the teaching English through football, it's really fascinating. Another example, probably just what happened today, the game between Saudi Arabia and Argentina, and then that game definitely will be in the history of the World Cups, and something which is it's based on the Saudi capacities playing the football. So this is the kind of free way to implement soft power, just to show its kind of strength in a way, or just to win kind of I think the country was Argentina was beaten like 39 times before. So that's something which will be now in newspapers everywhere. So this is one of the way, I believe. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. That means we can deal with sport as a power on its own, not related or mirroring any other sort or extension of all other powers, or it can stand also alone as source of power itself.
Yeah, when
think
you build on your own capacities, when the country built on its own capacities.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Dear distinguished speaker, thank you very much for contributing with us in this fruitful discussion. And I wish we could have more of this. And we might think by the end of this event, or let a little bit of time goes and see what are the implications. We can have some sort of a review for what happens, hoping that everything could go well. And thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And we hope to see you in other opportunities. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.